Here's a nice close-up shot of cutting the mortises in the legs, which have been squared up to 2 1/4 inch by 2 1/4 inch by 32.5 inch square cherry billets, and I'm using a 2-flute 1/2 inch mill bit to cut the mortises. Here's a fairly loose fit, dry run of the clamp up. You can see I've made some spacers to keep the legs separated the way I would like them to be when the piece is finally completed in the glue up. And you can also see the ends of the double through tenons on each of the small stretchers. And I've kept the legs square. Have not shaped them yet because I want to do the glue up of the entire stretcher assembly with those legs in exactly the position they need to be in the final product, clamps and all, so that the stretcher assembly will become a very solid unit, and then I'll shape the legs and glue them on. Now, while I'm doing all the machining, I also need to machine a slot in the top of each leg so that there can be a short upper stretcher that fits into this slot on each leg, and the top will then be attached to this on each side, on the legs. So I've used my dado cutting blade on a tenon jig to cut these slots in the tops of the legs. Now, the 3 boxes that make up the carcass are supported on the short stretchers. Each box needs 2 short stretchers, but if you noticed from all the video you've seen, I've only got 4 short stretchers. I need 2 more. So I've made the 2 additional short stretchers that help hold up the outer 2 boxes out of short stretchers that fit between the long stretchers but don't have tenons on the end. Instead, they're doweled on the end to go into matching dowel holes on the insides of the long stretchers. So this next little video shows how I cut the how I drill the dowel holes into these short stretcher ends. All the joinery on the stretchers and legs is done now. So the next thing I did was to cut a very shallow curve on the bottom of the bottom stretchers, and that I did on the bandsaw. And now I'm going to go ahead and relieve the edges a little bit with a spoke shave to give it a nice rounded smooth edge. If you don't do this, these edges are so sharp, I actually cut my finger on one of the corners. Very easy to do. So by relieving these edges a little bit, make it nice to the feel. The short stretchers have double tenons that fit into mortises cut into the long stretchers, and I'm going to wedge these tenons. That is, I've cut slots, 2 slots in each tenon, and I've made poly wedges that are nice and white to contrast with the cherry, and those wedges fit right into the slots cut into the tenons. So once the tenon is in the mortise and all the way through, I'll go ahead and I'll drive the wedges in, and then after all the glue is dried, I'll go ahead and trim off everything nice and neatly, and you'll see nice little vertical white lines of holly on each side of the tenons. Holds it very securely and looks very nice. In the next small clip, I'll just show you how I cut these slots in the tenons for the wedges using the bandsaw. I always sand my work before I glue the pieces up, and if I'm using a shellac polish, I also finish it with the shellac before I glue up, so I don't have any shellac getting into the corners of the pieces. I've got a downdraft sanding table here. It's got filters in it. It'll take the dust that I create and capture it in the filters so I don't have to breathe it. I'll be sanding with 320 grit to 400 grit sandpaper on this before I put shellac on. I said earlier that I like to finish the parts before I glue them up if I'm using something like shellac, which is hard to sand out of the little corners after I glue up. So I mix up my own shellac using, in this case, de-waxed blonde shellac flakes, mixed at the ratio of a ½ pound of flakes to a gallon of denatured alcohol, and when I'm done I get a very thin solution here that I can then wipe onto the surface. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour a little bit of this solution into my little container, and inside the container I've got a piece of folded up cotton cloth. And I'll just wring some out there, and I'll simply just spread it onto the surface in a wiping motion. It's very thin. I will do this and let it dry. It doesn't take long, and then I will sand it, working up to P600 grit sandpaper, and I'll do this process 6 or 7 times until the finish is silky smooth, which is the way I want it to be. The big day has arrived where I'm going to glue up the entire stretcher assembly. You can see I've prepared the glue up table, which is actually my extension table on my saw stop, and all the parts are ready to go. I've got clamps waiting at the ready, all my spacer blocks and so forth. I've also gone and applied a product called Waxy Lit to all the places where I don't want glue that squeezes out to stick, like the insides of the stretchers where the mortises are. I don't want glue sticking to those surfaces, so I've applied a little Waxy Lit, which is just a waxy substance I learned about from Michael Fortune that you can get from Lee Valley, and it's just a little waxy stuff you wipe on, and the glue will not stick to the wax, and later on you can just wipe it off maybe with a little bit of solvent. So we're ready to go. I've got the glue ready. 2 different kinds of glue, the whiter glue for the wedges, the darker glue here, Type Bond 3, for the mortise and tenon joints. And throughout this process I'll try to film as much as I can, but don't expect me to do too much talking because this is a very complex glue up. I got to work very fast. I think there's something like 32 mortise and tenon joints here, 64 wedges, plus the dowel joints that all have to go together before the glue sets. easily one of the most complex glue-ups I've ever done. I got everything aligned properly, and now I'm just finishing up driving the wedges for each of the double tenons. I use the chisel to just open up the wedge slots a little bit. Makes it easier to get the wedge in there initially, because these slots do tend to close up a little bit during the glue up. And I want to get the wedges in there evenly so that the white line of the wedges is about the same thickness on each side of the tenon.